The great hall of Apex Prime Station stretched like a cathedral made of metal and glass. Stars glittered through the massive windows, cold and distant just like the hundreds of alien delegates who filled the chamber. They had come from every corner of the galaxy for this summit. War had raged for decades between different species and empires. Now finally there was a chance for peace. Deho stood near the back of the human delegation section watching the arrivals. He was a man in his mid-40s with gray touches at his temples, and eyes that had seen too many negotiations fail. His black diplomatic uniform was simple compared to the elaborate costumes worn by other species. Earth was new here. Humanity had only reached the stars a century ago. They were the youngsters in a galaxy full of ancient civilizations. His assistant, Yuna, fidgeted beside him, clutching her datapad like a lifeline. She was younger, maybe 28, with nervous energy that made her scan every entrance and exit. This was her first major summit. Deho had stopped counting his years ago. "They say she's actually coming," Yuna whispered, her voice tight. "I thought it was just a rumor." Deho said nothing. He had heard the rumors too. Queen Nara of the Velrathi Empire had accepted the invitation. It was unprecedented. The Velrathi rarely attended galactic gatherings. When they did, violence usually followed. The chamber gradually filled. Insectoid delegates from the hive clusters took their elevated platforms. The crystalline shardborn floated in their zero-gravity spheres. Massive reptilian warriors from a dozen warrior species stood like living walls. Everyone had their place, their designated zones carefully calculated by the Council's security teams. Then the lights dimmed slightly. A hush fell over the chamber. Even the translator devices seemed to quiet. Daiho felt it before he saw anything, a change in the atmosphere, like pressure dropping before a storm. The main entrance doors slid open. Queen Nara entered, and the galaxy held its breath. She was tall, perhaps 6.5 feet, with skin the color of pale moonlight. Her features were sharp and elegant, almost painfully beautiful in an inhuman way. Long silver hair flowed behind her like liquid metal. She wore armor that seemed to be made from black crystal, fitted perfectly to her form, but it was her eyes that caught everyone's attention. They glowed with a deep crimson light, ancient and knowing. Behind her walked 4 Velrathi guards, each one massive and imposing in their obsidian battle gear. But everyone knew the truth. She did not need guards. She was the danger. The queen walked slowly through the hall. With each step, delegates moved back. It was not a conscious decision for most of them. It was instinct. Prey moving away from a predator. By the time she reached her designated area, a raised platform isolated from the others, a clear circle of empty space surrounded her. No one stood within 10 meters. She sat on her throne, a simple chair of dark metal, and waited. Her face showed nothing. No emotion. No reaction to the fear radiating from hundreds of beings. She simply existed, alone in a crowded room. Deho studied her carefully. He had spent months preparing for this summit, reading every file he could access about the major powers. The Velrathi Empire fascinated him, though his colleagues thought him crazy for even being curious. The Velrathi were vampires, though that human word did not quite capture what they were. They fed on life essence, drawing energy from other living beings to survive. A single Velrathi could drain a human dry in minutes. Their strength was legendary. Their speed was impossible to track with normal eyes. They lived for thousands of years, getting stronger with each century. 5,000 years ago, they had been different. The historical records were fragmentary, but Daiho had pieced together the story. The Velrathi had been a peaceful species once, traders and artists. Then the Crimson Plague swept through their worlds. It changed them at a genetic level, made them into what they were now, made them need to feed on others. The galaxy had responded with horror and war. The Velrathi had fought back, driven by hunger and survival. Entire species had been lost in those wars. Now the Velrathi Empire existed in isolated space, avoided by all, feared by everyone. And Queen Nara had ruled them for 3 centuries. She had been young when she took the throne, or so the records said. Now she was ancient by human standards, though she looked no older than 30 in human years. The summit began with formal speeches. A counselor from the Avari Federation spoke about peace and cooperation. His words were noble but hollow. Everyone could feel the tension. How could there be real peace when beings like Queen Nara existed? How could anyone trust vampires? During the first recess, delegates scattered to different areas. The station had many lounges and meeting rooms designed for private conversations. This was where the real work happened, in hallways and corners away from formal procedures. Queen Nara remained exactly where she was. Her guards stood nearby, but she needed no protection. She sat alone, crimson eyes watching the crowd move around her like water flowing around a stone. Deho made a decision. Yuna was talking to a delegate from the merchant guilds when she noticed Deho walking away. She turned to follow, then froze. He was heading toward the Velrathi area. "Sir," she hissed, hurrying after him. "What are you doing?" He did not answer. He had already decided. Fear was the mind killer, an ancient human saying went. Fear had kept the galaxy frozen in cycles of violence for too long. Other delegates noticed now. Conversation stopped. People stared. The human was walking toward the vampire queen. The Velrathi guards saw him coming. Their hands moved to their weapons, strange blade-like devices that hummed with energy. But Queen Nara raised one pale hand and they froze in place. She was watching Deho with those glowing red eyes, curious now. He stopped at a respectful distance, maybe 2 meters away, close enough to speak normally, far enough to show he understood boundaries. He bowed, not too deep, not too shallow. "A gesture of respect between equals, Your Majesty," he said in clear, practiced Velrathi. The language was harsh and flowing at the same time. He had spent weeks learning the proper pronunciation. "I am Ambassador Deho of Earth. I wonder if you might have a moment to speak." The entire visible portion of the chamber had gone silent. Hundreds of beings watched this impossible scene. A human, fragile and short-lived, approaching the most dangerous predator in the known galaxy. Queen Nara tilted her head slightly. Her expression had not changed, but something flickered in those crimson eyes, surprise perhaps, or suspicion. When she spoke, her voice was like silk over steel. "You speak my language, human." "I tried to learn it properly," Deho replied. "I may still make mistakes. I apologize in advance. Why have you approached me?" It was a simple question, but loaded with danger. Deho could feel sweat on his back, but his voice remained steady. "Because you are here alone," he said quietly, "and I thought that must be difficult." For a long moment nothing happened. Queen Nara stared at him with those ancient alien eyes. He could not read her expression. He did not know if he had just made the greatest diplomatic breakthrough in human history or the last mistake of his life. Then, slowly she gestured to a space near her throne. "Sit, Ambassador Deho of Earth," she said. "Let us speak." Deho sat in the designated chair, aware that every being in the chamber was watching. He could feel Yuna's panic from across the room, could sense the shocked whispers spreading like ripples through water. But he kept his focus on Queen Nara. Up close she was even more striking. Her features were perfect in an unsettling way, too precise to be natural. The crimson glow of her eyes pulsed slightly with each breath she took. He could see the faint pattern of silver veins beneath her pale skin, like frost patterns on a window. She radiated cold, not just temperature, though the air around her was noticeably cooler, but something deeper, an ancient coldness that came from centuries of isolation. "You are either very brave or very foolish," she said, studying him with those unblinking eyes. "Probably both," Deho admitted. "My team certainly thinks so." The faintest hint of something crossed her face. Not quite a smile, but perhaps the ghost of one. "Your heart is beating very fast, Ambassador. I can hear it from here. You are afraid." "Yes," he said simply. "No point in lying to a predator." But being afraid and being hostile are different things. Most beings do not make that distinction where my kind is concerned. Most beings have not studied your history as thoroughly as I have. Now she did react. Her head tilted further, genuine curiosity showing through her controlled expression. "You studied the Velrathi. Why?" "Because Earth teaches us that understanding prevents conflict," Deho said. "We nearly destroyed ourselves once through ignorance and fear. We learned painfully that the unknown becomes less frightening when you take time to understand it. And what do you think you understand about us, human?" Deho chose his words carefully. "I understand that your people were not always as they are now. I read about the Crimson Plague 5,000 years ago, how it changed your entire species. I read about the wars that followed, how the galaxy hunted your people nearly to extinction. I read about the isolation that followed, the centuries of fear and hatred. He paused. I understand that survival sometimes requires terrible choices. Queen Nara was very still. Too still. For a moment, Deho wondered if he had gone too far, touched on something that would trigger violence, but when she spoke, her voice was quieter than before. You speak of things most species prefer to forget, or to twist into simple stories where we are monsters and they are innocent victims. History is rarely simple, Deho said, and monsters are usually made, not born. They sat in silence for a moment. Around them, the summit continued, but it felt distant, unimportant. The Velrathi guards had relaxed slightly, though they still watched Deho with predator eyes. Finally, Queen Nara spoke again. Your kind is new to galactic society, young and naive. Why risk this? Why approach me and potentially damage your standing with other species? Because isolation helps no one, Deho said. Earth is young, yes. Maybe that is why we can still see clearly. We look at you and see not just a predator, but a leader carrying an impossible burden. A queen trying to protect her people in a galaxy that wants them dead. For the first time, emotion clearly crossed Queen Nara's face. Shock, perhaps, or something deeper. Her crimson eyes widened slightly. You see me as a leader? Are you not? Most see me as a monster wearing a crown. Then most are not looking properly. The conversation stretched longer. Deho asked about Velrathi culture, about their arts and philosophy. Queen Nara answered cautiously at first, then with growing openness. She spoke of poetry written in her language, of sculptures that captured light in impossible ways, of music that predated the plague. She spoke of her people as more than hunters, more than vampires. She spoke of them as people. When the recess ended and delegates returned to their seats, something had shifted. The galaxy had watched a human sit and speak with the vampire queen for nearly an hour. Both had emerged unchanged, unharmed. It was a small thing, but small things could change the course of rivers. That evening, Deho returned to the human delegation quarters to find his entire team waiting for him. Yuna looked like she had been crying from stress. Taman, his security chief, stood with arms crossed and a face like thunder. The others watched him with expressions ranging from awe to anger. Explain, Taman demanded. He was a former soldier, broad-shouldered and blunt. Explain why you just risked your life and possibly Earth's entire diplomatic position. Deho poured himself water from the dispenser, his hands steady despite his exhaustion. I did what I thought was right. Right? Yuna's voice cracked. Sir, she is a vampire. She could have killed you with one hand. She feeds on living beings. Yes, Deho agreed calmly. And she has to live with that reality every single day. Imagine it. Imagine needing to harm others to survive, not by choice but by biology. Imagine being hated for something you cannot control. That does not make her safe, Taman argued. I never said she was safe. I said she deserved respect. Deho sat down heavily. We have received 14 formal complaints from other delegations. They say I was provocative, reckless, dangerous, but we have also received 9 messages from smaller species, thanking us for showing courage they could not. Courage or stupidity, Yuna muttered. Deho smiled tiredly. Sometimes they are the same thing. He looked at each of them. I read Queen Nara's personal history files, the ones most species ignore because they do not fit the monster narrative. She was 23 when the plague hit her world. Just a young woman studying art and philosophy. She watched her entire family change, watched society collapse. When she took the throne 300 years ago, her people were on the edge of extinction. She has kept them alive through sheer will and impossible choices. She has also led armies that destroyed entire colonies. Taman pointed out, yes, in wars where her people were attacked first. Deho rubbed his eyes. I am not saying the Velrathi are innocent. I am saying the situation is complicated. And complications require understanding, not just fear. The room fell silent. Finally, Yuna spoke quietly. What was she like? When you spoke with her? Deho thought about it. Lonely, he said finally. Incredibly lonely. Like someone who has been alone for so long that she has forgotten what connection feels like. Later that night, Deho could not sleep. He stood by the window of his quarters looking out at the stars. Apex Prime orbited a small moon and the view was spectacular. Somewhere out there was Earth 30 light-years away. Home seemed very distant. His door chimed. He opened it to find no one there, but a small package sat on the floor. Inside was a data crystal with a simple message in Velrathi script. It took him a moment to translate it. Thank you for seeing me. Deho held the crystal carefully. It was a small thing, a simple message, but it represented something larger, a crack in the wall of isolation that surrounded the Velrathi Empire, a possibility of something different. He did not know yet that this moment would change everything, that his simple act of kindness would ripple across the galaxy in ways no one could predict. He only knew that he had done what felt right, and that Queen Nara, the monster no one dared approach, had thanked him for it. In her own quarters on the other side of the station, Queen Nara stood in darkness. Her guards were outside, giving her rare privacy. She looked at her own reflection in the polished wall, seeing what she always saw, a predator, a killer, a thing of necessity and survival. But for a brief moment today, a human had looked at her and seen something else. Seen a person, seen a leader, seen someone worthy of respect rather than just fear. It had been 300 years since anyone had made her feel like that, 300 years of being the monster everyone expected. And now this human, this fragile, short-lived being had looked past the crimson eyes and the fangs and the power, and had simply sat and talked with her. She did not cry. She had not cried in centuries, but something deep inside her, something she thought had died long ago, stirred, a small, fragile thing called hope. And that, she realized, might be the most dangerous thing of all. The news spread faster than light, or at least it felt that way. By the next morning, every delegation on Apex Prime knew about the human who had sat with the Vampire Queen. News feeds across a dozen species broadcast the images captured by security cameras. Daiho and Queen Nara sitting together, talking like two normal beings having a conversation. The reactions were explosive. The Avari Federation issued a formal statement expressing concern about human judgment and diplomatic protocol. The warrior clans of Thurok called it an insult to all who had lost people to Velrathi raids. The merchant guilds worried it would destabilize trade negotiations. 3 minor species threatened to withdraw from the summit entirely. But there were other voices too. Quieter ones. A delegate from the peaceful Rim world sent a private message thanking Earth for showing courage. A representative of the enslaved species whispered in hallways that maybe humans understood what it meant to be judged unfairly. The galaxy was divided, and Daiho stood at the center of the divide. The Summit Council called an emergency session. Daiho was summoned to explain himself before the full assembly. As he walked to the council chamber, Yuna hurried beside him, her face pale with worry. "They are going to crucify you," she whispered. "The Avari representative has already called for your removal from the summit." "Let them," Daiho said calmly. He had slept well after finding the crystal message. For the first time in years, he felt like he had done something that truly mattered. The council chamber was packed. Every seat filled, every species represented. Daiho stood in the center, alone under bright lights while hundreds of eyes watched him. The head counselor, an elderly Avari with silver feathers and sharp eyes, spoke first. "Ambassador Daiho of Earth, you are accused of reckless behavior endangering the summit and showing disrespect to species who have suffered from Velrathi aggression. What do you say to these charges?" Daiho looked around the chamber. He saw anger, fear, confusion. But he also saw curiosity. He took a breath and spoke clearly. "I approached Queen Nara because I believe peace requires understanding. We cannot negotiate with beings we refuse to even speak to. I studied Velrathi history, learned their language, and treated their leader with the respect any leader deserves. If that is reckless, then I am guilty." A Thurok warrior stood, his massive form bristling with anger. "Respect? You show respect to vampires who have killed thousands of our people?" "I show respect to a leader trying to protect her species from extinction," Daiho replied. "The Velrathi feed to survive, yes. But did we not all see the historical records? They were victims of a plague they did not create. They were hunted nearly to extinction by the very species now demanding peace. How can we expect them to trust a galaxy that has only ever shown them violence? They are monsters," someone shouted from the crowd. "They are people," Daiho said firmly. "People changed by circumstances beyond their control. People trying to survive in a hostile universe. If we cannot find compassion for them, what hope do we have for real peace?" The debate raged for hours. Species argued back and forth. Some supported Daiho's actions, most condemned them. But through it all, one section of the chamber remained silent. Queen Nara sat on her isolated platform, listening to every word. Her face showed nothing, but Daiho occasionally caught her eyes, and in them he saw something complicated. Surprise, perhaps. or respect. Finally, the council voted. By a narrow margin, they decided not to expel Deho or the human delegation. But he received a formal warning. Any further provocative actions would result in immediate removal. As the session ended and delegates filed out, Deho felt exhausted but satisfied. He had spoken his truth. Whether it changed anything remained to be seen. That evening, the human delegation gathered in their quarters. The mood was tense. Taman paced like a caged animal, clearly unhappy with the day's events. Yuna sat quietly processing everything. The other team members whispered among themselves. "We are now marked," Taman said bluntly. "Every species is watching us. One wrong move and Earth's reputation in galactic politics is destroyed." "Maybe," Deho agreed. "Or maybe we have shown something important, that humans judge beings by their actions, not just their nature." "Pretty philosophy," Taman muttered. "But philosophy does not protect us if things go wrong." There was a chime at the door. Yuna went to answer it, then froze. She turned back to Deho, her eyes wide. "Sir, there is a Velrathi guard outside. He says Queen Nara requests your presence." The room went silent. Taman's hand moved instinctively to his weapon. Though they all knew it would be useless against Velrathi, Deho stood calmly. "Tell him I will come." "Absolutely not," Taman said. "Sir, this could be a trap." "It could be," Deho agreed. "But I do not think it is. She had many opportunities to harm me yesterday. She did not. Yesterday was public. This is a private meeting," Deho smiled, "which makes it more important. If Queen Nara wants to speak privately, that means real communication is possible." He looked at his team. "I am going." "That is final," Yuna grabbed his arm. "At least take Taman with you." Deho gently removed her hand. "No, this needs to be between us. Trust me." He followed the Velrathi guard through the station corridors. Other delegates saw them and quickly moved aside, staring. Word would spread again. The human going to meet the vampire queen in private. More scandal, more controversy. Deho did not care. They reached a section of the station reserved for the Velrathi delegation. The doors were heavy, reinforced, designed to contain beings of terrible strength. The guard led Deho through multiple checkpoints until they reached a large chamber. Queen Nara stood by a window, looking out at the stars. She wore no armor now, just a simple dark gown that made her look less like a warrior and more like a person. She turned as he entered, and he was struck again by how beautiful and terrible she was, like a work of art that could kill you. "You came," she said. "You asked." Many would not have, especially after today's council session. Deho shrugged. "I say what I believe. The consequences are secondary." She studied him for a long moment. "You defended us. In front of the entire council, you defended the Velrathi. Why?" "Because the truth matters," Deho said simply. "Because I have seen what happens when fear replaces understanding. My own species nearly destroyed itself through hatred and ignorance. We learned better. I hope the galaxy can too." Queen Nara moved closer, her movements fluid and predatory. Deho's instinct screamed at him to run, but he held his ground. She stopped just out of arm's reach. "I have ruled my people for 3 centuries, she said quietly. "In that time I have negotiated with thousands of beings. Some feared me openly. Some hid their fear behind false politeness. All of them saw me as a monster to be contained or destroyed. You are the first in 300 years to look at me and see a person." Then they were not looking properly. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "My people are dying, Ambassador. Not quickly, but inevitably. We need to feed on life essence to survive. And the galaxy has made it clear they would rather see us extinct than find a solution. We are trapped between survival and genocide." Deho felt the weight of her words. "Is there no cure? No treatment for the plague that changed you?" "We have searched for 5,000 years. Our best scientists have found nothing. The plague altered us at a fundamental level. We are no longer what we were." She looked away. "Sometimes I wonder if we are even worthy of survival. If a species that must harm others to live deserves to exist, every species deserves the chance to exist," Deho said firmly. "The question is not whether you deserve survival, but whether the galaxy can find a solution that works for everyone." "You sound hopeful." "I am. Hope is what humans do best." Queen Nara laughed, a soft sound that seemed strange coming from her. "Hope, such a human concept. We Velrathi deal in certainties. Survival or death. Strength or weakness. Maybe that is why you have been alone for so long," Deho suggested gently. "Hope requires trust. Trust requires connection. You cannot do either if you remain isolated." She looked at him again, and this time he saw something in her eyes that looked almost like pain. "I have been alone for a very long time, Ambassador. You do not have to be." They talked for hours. About history, philosophy, and the nature of survival. Queen Nara spoke of her people, their culture, their struggles. Deho listened and shared stories of Earth, of human history, of mistakes and redemption. When he finally left, the station's night cycle had begun. As he walked back to his quarters, Deho realized something fundamental had changed. The galaxy had seen a human and a Velrathi talk not as enemies, but as equals. It was a small crack in ancient walls of fear and hatred. Small cracks, he thought, could eventually bring down entire walls. The summit had been running for 2 weeks when everything went wrong. Progress had been slow but steady. Various species were negotiating trade agreements, territorial boundaries, and mutual defense pacts. The presence of Queen Nara remained controversial, but Deho's continued conversations with her had created a strange new dynamic. Other delegates watched, uncertain how to react. Some avoided the humans now, considering them contaminated by association with vampires. Others approached quietly, curious about this species that showed no fear. Deho had met with Queen Nara 5 more times, always in semi-public settings. They discussed everything from art to politics, from history to philosophy. She was brilliant, he discovered, with a mind sharpened by centuries of experience. She was also deeply lonely, though she hid it well behind her regal mask. Their conversations became something he looked forward to, a bright spot in the tedious machinery of diplomatic proceedings. Yuna had stopped protesting his meetings with the Queen, though she still worried constantly. Taman remained vigilant, always scanning for threats. He trusted Nara about as far as he could throw a battleship, but he respected Deho's judgment enough to allow the meetings to continue. It was during a full council session that the attack came. The chamber was packed as usual, hundreds of delegates discussing a proposed trade corridor through disputed space. The debate was heated but controlled. Deho sat with his team taking notes on his datapad. Queen Nara occupied her isolated platform, her guard stationed nearby. The explosion came without warning. One of the ventilation panels blew inward with a roar of fire and shrapnel. Screams filled the chamber as delegates dove for cover. Then the shooting started. Figures in black combat suits dropped through the hole, weapons blazing. Energy bolts cut through the air, striking delegates and guards alike. Deho's military training from his youth kicked in. He grabbed Yuna and pulled her down behind their seats. Taman was already moving, his weapon drawn, positioning himself between the attackers and the human delegation. "Assassins!" someone screamed. "They are targeting the Vampire Queen." It was true. Most of the weapons fire was directed at Queen Nara's platform. The attackers were professional, well-equipped, and clearly prepared. They had anti-Velrathi weapons, electromagnetic pulses designed to disrupt Velrathi nervous systems. They had armor that could withstand typical station defenses, but they had not truly understood what they were attacking. Queen Nara moved like liquid death. One moment she was sitting on her throne, the next she was in motion. She dodged energy bolts that should have been impossible to avoid, moving faster than human eyes could track. Her guards engaged the attackers, obsidian blades clashing against advanced armor. Chaos filled the chamber. Delegates were running, screaming, trying to reach exits that had been sealed by the attackers. More explosions rocked the station. This was not a simple assassination attempt. This was a coordinated assault designed to kill Queen Nara and destroy the summit. Deho stayed low, helping Yuna and other nearby delegates find cover. Taman fired at the attackers, providing covering fire for fleeing diplomats. The human delegation had minimal weapons, but they were trained in crisis protocols. Then Deho saw it. One of the attackers had broken away from the main fight. He was placing something on the chamber wall, a device that pulsed with ominous red light. A bomb. A big one, judging by the size. The attacker activated it and retreated toward an exit. The timer showed 30 seconds. "Bomb!" Deho shouted, but his voice was lost in the chaos. He looked around desperately. The device was placed near a section where at least 20 delegates had taken cover, including several from peaceful species who had no combat training. They would never make it out in time if that thing exploded. Queen Nara was fighting 3 attackers simultaneously, her movements a blur of lethal grace. Her guards were engaged with others. Station security was finally arriving, but too slowly. The timer read 20 seconds. Deho made a decision. He ran toward the bomb. Yuna screamed his name. Taman turned, saw what he was doing, and shouted something, but Deho was already moving. He reached the device and stared at it, his mind racing. 15 seconds. He had basic demolitions training from his military days, but that was decades ago, and this was alien technology. The trapped delegates saw him now. They were calling out, begging for help. 12 seconds. Deho's fingers moved over the device, trying to find an access panel, a control interface, anything. 10 seconds. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was insane. He should run. He should save himself. But then he looked at the faces of the beings huddled nearby, terrified, helpless, waiting to die. 8 seconds. He found a panel and pried it open. Inside was a tangle of wires and alien components. 6 seconds. No time to figure it out. He grabbed a handful of wires and pulled. The device sparked. The timer flickered. 4 seconds. Had he made it worse? Was it going to explode anyway? Then everything happened at once. Something slammed into him from the side, driving him away from the bomb. He hit the ground hard, the air driven from his lungs. He looked up in time to see Queen Nara standing over him, having just thrown him clear. She turned back to the bomb. 2 seconds. She grabbed the entire device and hurled it with impossible strength toward the hole in the ceiling the attackers had used. It flew through the opening and detonated outside the chamber, the explosion muffled by distance and the station's hull. Deho lay on the floor, stunned. Queen Nara had saved him. She had saved everyone. But the fight was not over. The remaining attackers, realizing their plan had failed, were making a desperate last stand. One of them saw Queen Nara momentarily exposed, focused on the bomb. He raised a heavy plasma weapon and fired. The bolt caught her in the shoulder, spinning her around. Anti-Velrathi plasma, designed to burn through their regeneration. She hissed in pain, a sound that made everyone's blood run cold. Then she straightened, and her eyes blazed with fury. What happened next was terrifying to watch. Queen Nara stopped holding back. She moved through the attackers like a storm, her speed impossible, her strength overwhelming. She did not kill them, but she disabled each one with precise, brutal efficiency. In less than 30 seconds, all the attackers were down, broken and unconscious. The chamber fell silent except for the sound of alarms and frightened breathing. Queen Nara stood in the center of the carnage, wounded and covered in blood that was not her own. She looked around at the delegates, at the destruction, at the bodies. Her eyes found Deho still lying where she had thrown him to safety. She walked toward him slowly. Every being in the chamber tensed. They had just seen what she could do when unleashed. They had seen the monster beneath the queen. She stopped beside Deho and extended her hand. A simple gesture offering to help him up. He took it without hesitation. Her hand was cold and strong. She pulled him to his feet easily, her crimson eyes searching his face. You tried to disarm the bomb yourself. You could have died. So could you, Deho replied. You threw it away. You saved everyone. You tried to save everyone first. They stood there, human and vampire, surrounded by chaos and staring delegates. Then Yuna was there, throwing her arms around Deho, crying. Taman arrived a moment later, checking him for injuries. Station security finally secured the chamber. Medical teams rushed in to treat the wounded. The summit was suspended while investigations began. But everyone knew this changed everything. Queen Nara had defended not just herself but all the delegates. She had protected beings from species that considered her an enemy, and Deho, the human ambassador, had tried to sacrifice himself to save others. That evening, as Deho sat in the medical bay being treated for bruises and shock, he received a visitor. Queen Nara entered quietly, her shoulder already healing thanks to Velrathi regeneration. She had changed out of her ruined clothes and wore simple dark robes. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Like I got hit by a freight train," Deho admitted. "You throw hard. I apologize for the rough handling. There was no time for gentleness in what you saved my life. Again, I am not complaining." She sat in the chair beside his bed, an oddly domestic gesture that made the medical staff nervous enough to leave them alone. "Why did you try to disarm the bomb? You had time to escape. There were people who needed help. You are not a soldier. You are a diplomat." "I am human," Deho said simply. "We help when we can. It is what we do." Queen Nara looked at him for a long moment. "Your species is very strange. We prefer the term eccentric. She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her face. I have lived for centuries, Ambassador. I have seen countless acts of violence, betrayal, and cruelty, but today I saw something different. I saw you risk your life for beings you barely know. I saw you try to save people who would probably never thank you. She paused. It reminded me that there is still good in this galaxy. There has always been good, Deho said. Sometimes it just gets buried under fear and hatred. They sat together in the quiet medical bay, and for a moment the galaxy's problems seemed distant. Two beings from different worlds, learning that perhaps understanding was possible after all. 3 days after the attack, Deho was still in the medical bay. The doctors insisted on keeping him for observation, claiming his injuries were more serious than they first appeared. He suspected Taman had something to do with the extended stay, his security chief wanting him somewhere safe and controlled while the investigation continued. The attackers had been identified as members of the Coalition for Free Worlds, a radical group that believed vampiric species should be eliminated entirely. They had been planning the assault for months, waiting for the perfect moment when Queen Nara would be surrounded by other delegates. Their goal had been to kill her and frame it as self-defense, hoping to trigger a war that would unite the galaxy against the Velrathi. Instead, they had shown the galaxy something unexpected. They had shown Queen Nara protecting the very beings who feared her. The news coverage was extensive. Every major network across dozens of species broadcast the security footage. Queen Nara saving delegates, Deho trying to disarm the bomb, the human and the vampire standing together in the aftermath. Public opinion was shifting slowly but noticeably. Not everyone, not even most, but enough to matter. Deho was reading reports on his datapad when the lights in his room dimmed slightly. He looked up to find Queen Nara standing in the doorway. She wore no armor, no royal regalia, just simple dark clothing that made her look almost normal. Almost. "May I come in?" she asked. "Of course." He set aside the datapad and sat up straighter in the medical bed, though visiting hours technically ended 2 hours ago. "I convinced the guards to make an exception." The way she said it suggested the guards had not needed much convincing. Fear was a powerful motivator. She entered and closed the door behind her. For a moment she just stood there looking uncertain. It was strange seeing uncertainty in someone so powerful, so ancient. She moved to the chair beside his bed but did not sit immediately. "I wanted to speak with you privately," she said finally, away from guards and cameras and watching eyes. "All right." She sat down slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. Up close, in the dim medical bay lighting, she looked tired. "Could vampires get tired?" "Apparently so." "I owe you a debt," she began. "No, you do not. You saved my life. We are even." "That is not what I mean." She looked at her hands, pale and perfect in her lap. "You saw me during the attack. You saw what I can do, what I really am when I stop holding back. Everyone in that chamber saw the monster." "I saw someone protecting others," Deho corrected. "I saw strength used in defense, not aggression. You are very good at seeing what you want to see. I see what is there. Maybe others are too blind with fear to look properly." Queen Nara was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer than he had ever heard it. "Do you know what it is like, Ambassador? To know that your very existence causes fear, that children of other species have nightmares about creatures like you, that your presence in a room makes people want to run?" "No," Deho admitted. "I cannot fully understand that. I have been queen for 300 years. Before that I was just Nara, just a young woman who liked art and music and poetry. I had dreams of traveling, of seeing the galaxy, of maybe finding love someday." Her crimson eyes grew distant. "Then the plague came. It spread through our worlds like fire. Within a year, our entire species was changed. Everyone I knew, everyone I loved, transformed into what we are now." Deho listened silently. This was not history from files. This was personal. "The hunger was immediate and terrible," she continued. "We did not understand what was happening to us. We attacked other species out of desperation, out of need. The galaxy responded with war. Billions died on both sides. My family, my friends, everyone I cared about was killed in the fighting. I survived because I was strong and because I learned to be ruthless." "I am sorry," Deho said quietly. "Do not be. I am not telling you this for sympathy. I am telling you so you understand. I took the throne because my people needed a leader who could protect them. I have made terrible decisions. I have ordered actions that resulted in deaths. I have done things that haunt me even now, centuries later. I am not innocent, Ambassador. I am exactly what the galaxy thinks I am. A survivor, Deho said firmly. A leader making impossible choices in impossible situations. A monster. No. His voice was hard now, brooking no argument. You are a person dealt a terrible hand by fate, trying to protect your people in a hostile universe. That is not monstrous. That is noble. Queen Nara looked at him, and for the first time he saw tears gathering in her crimson eyes. How can you say that? You know what we do, what we must do to survive. I know that you feed on life essence, Deho acknowledged. I know that it causes harm to others. I also know that you have strict laws about it. That your people only feed from willing participants or criminals sentenced by proper courts. That you have been searching for an alternative for 5,000 years. That is not the behavior of monsters. That is the behavior of people trying to minimize harm while surviving. The galaxy does not see it that way. Then the galaxy is wrong. She stared at him, those ancient eyes searching his face for deception, for hidden motives, for anything that would explain this impossible human and his impossible compassion. She found only honesty. Why? She whispered. Why do you care so much? Why risk everything for people you barely know? Deho thought about his answer carefully. My grandfather fought in the last war on Earth. Humans fighting humans over ideology and resources. Terrible weapons were used. Terrible things were done by both sides. Afterward, when the survivors rebuilt, they had a choice. They could continue the hatred, continue seeing each other as enemies, or they could choose something different. He paused, remembering stories from his childhood. My grandfather told me that the hardest thing he ever did was extend his hand to a former enemy. A man who had fought against his side, who might have killed his friends. But he did it, and that handshake changed everything. It started a chain reaction of reconciliation that eventually led to Earth's unification. What does this have to do with me? Everything, Deho said. You are that former enemy. You are the one everyone fears and hates. But I look at you and I see someone who could be an ally, someone who could help build something better. I cannot do that if I let fear control me. None of us can. Queen Nara closed her eyes. A single tear traced down her pale cheek. I have been alone for so long, surrounded by people but utterly alone. No one has looked at me with kindness in centuries. No one has seen me as anything but a necessary evil to be tolerated at best, destroyed at worst. I see you, Deho said quietly. I see Nara, not just the queen. I see someone who carries impossible burdens with grace. Someone who protects her people despite the cost. Someone who deserves friendship, not just fear. She opened her eyes and looked at him. Friendship. Is that what you offer? A human and a vampire, friends? Why not? We have survived assassination attempts together. We have had good conversations. We make each other think differently. That sounds like the foundation of friendship to me. A laugh escaped her, genuine and surprised. You are either the bravest or most foolish being I have ever met. I am human. We excel at both. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while. Outside, the station continued its normal operations. Delegates were still negotiating, deals were still being made, the galaxy continued turning. But in this small medical bay, something important had happened. A connection had been forged, genuine and real, between two beings who should have been enemies. Finally, Queen Nara stood. I should let you rest. The doctors will be angry if they find me here. Probably. She moved toward the door, then paused. Deho? It was the first time she had used his name without his title. Yes, thank you. For seeing me. For this conversation. For everything. You are welcome, Nara. She smiled, and in that moment she did not look like an ancient vampire queen. She looked like someone who had finally found a friend after centuries of loneliness. After she left, Deho lay back in his bed and stared at the ceiling. He thought about what his grandfather would say if he could see him now. Probably something about humans being too curious for their own good, followed by grudging approval. The door opened again and Yuna entered carrying a tray of food. She stopped when she saw his expression. What happened? She asked. I think, Deho said slowly, I just made history, or possibly a huge mistake. Time will tell which. Yuna set down the tray and sat in the chair Nara had occupied. For what it is worth, sir. I think you are doing something important. Something that needed to be done. Most of us are too afraid to try. Fear is natural. Acting despite fear is what matters. Then you are the bravest person I know. Deho smiled. Or the most foolish. I am still not sure which, but deep down he knew. Sometimes bravery and foolishness were the same thing. And sometimes, just sometimes, that was exactly what the galaxy needed. The summit resumed 1 week after the attack. Security had been tripled, with multiple species providing guards and scanners. The Coalition for Free Worlds had been condemned by every major power, their members arrested across dozens systems. The attack had backfired spectacularly, creating sympathy where they had hoped to create hatred. The chamber felt different now. Delegates still maintained distance from Queen Nara's platform, but the fear had changed quality. It was less about terror and more about uncertainty. They had seen her fight to protect them, not against them. That changed calculations. Deho returned to his delegation section with his arm in a medical support sleeve. The doctors had finally cleared him for light duty. Yuna fussed over him constantly, making sure he was comfortable. Taman watched everyone with increased suspicion, his hand never far from his weapon. The first order of business was addressing the attack itself. The council condemned the violence and reaffirmed their commitment to peace. Several species gave speeches about unity and cooperation. It was all very diplomatic and ultimately meaningless without real action. Then it was Earth's turn to speak. Deho stood slowly, his body still aching from his injuries. He walked to the central platform, where speakers addressed the full assembly. He had prepared for this moment, spent sleepless nights crafting what he would say. Now standing under the lights with hundreds of alien eyes watching, he felt oddly calm. "Honored delegates," he began, his voice clear and steady. "I stand before you as someone who nearly died in this chamber 1 week ago. I was saved by Queen Nara of the Velrathi Empire. She threw me clear of the bomb and then protected all of us from the attackers. I owe her my life," murmurs rippled through the chamber. This was not typical diplomatic language. But I am not here to talk about debt or gratitude. I am here to propose a solution to a problem that has plagued this galaxy for 5,000 years. That got everyone's attention. Queen Nara leaned forward slightly on her throne, her crimson eyes focused entirely on him. "The Velrathi were victims of the Crimson Plague," Deho continued. "Through no fault of their own, their entire species was transformed into beings who must feed on life essence to survive. This has made them outcasts, hunted and feared across the galaxy. But what if there was another way? What if the plague could be cured?" The murmurs grew louder. Several delegates looked skeptical. The Velrathi had been searching for a cure for millennia without success. "Earth has experience with biological transformation," Deho said. "We have dealt with plagues, viruses, genetic diseases. We nearly destroyed ourselves with biological weapons centuries ago. We learned through terrible cost how to fight diseases at the molecular level. We have knowledge and technology that might help." He activated his datapad, and a holographic display appeared above the central platform. It showed complex genetic sequences and treatment protocols. Earth's xenobiology teams have been studying what limited information we have about the Crimson Plague. We believe there may be pathways to treatment, possibly even cure. It would require extensive research, cooperation between human and Velrathi scientists and resources. But it is possible. The chamber erupted. Some delegates shouted objections. Others asked questions. The Avari representative stood, his silver feathers ruffled with agitation. "This is fantasy," he declared. "The Velrathi have searched for 5,000 years. What makes humans think they can succeed where others failed? Because we approach the problem differently," Deho replied calmly. "We have no prejudice against the Velrathi. We see them as patients needing treatment, not monsters to be contained. Sometimes fresh eyes see solutions that familiar ones miss." A delegate from the Merchant Guild spoke up. "And what does Earth want in return for this miraculous cure?" "Nothing," Deho said simply. The chamber went silent. "This is humanitarian aid. If we can help free an entire species from a curse they never asked for, we will do it simply because it is right." "Ridiculous," someone muttered. "No species does anything without benefit." "Then you do not understand humans," Deho said. "We believe that helping others is its own reward. We believe that a galaxy where fewer beings suffer is better for everyone. We offer this freely with no conditions because it is what we do." He looked directly at Queen Nara. "Your Majesty, Earth formally offers to collaborate with Velrathi scientists on research into treating and potentially curing the Crimson Plague. We will share our knowledge, our technology, and our resources. We ask only that you accept our help. Queen Nara stood slowly. The entire chamber watched as she descended from her platform and walked toward the central area. She moved with her usual grace, but there was something different in her bearing, something almost vulnerable. She stopped before Deho, these two beings who had somehow become the center of galactic attention. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly through the silent chamber. Ambassador Deho, Earth has shown my people more kindness in these few weeks than we have received in 5,000 years. You offer us hope where we expected only more hatred. She paused, and her eyes glistened with emotion. On behalf of the Velrathi Empire, I accept your offer. We will work together toward a cure. The chamber exploded with noise. Delegates argued, debated, shouted. Some species were supportive, moved by the gesture. Others were furious, claiming it was naive or dangerous. The council called for order repeatedly. Finally, the head counselor gavelled the assembly to silence. This proposal requires a vote. All in favor of allowing Earth and the Velrathi Empire to collaborate on medical research, indicate now. The voting took an hour. It was close, terrifyingly close. Species who had suffered from Velrathi raids voted against. Species who valued innovation voted in favor. Smaller species who understood what it meant to be outcast voted in favor. The count went back and forth. In the end, the measure passed by a margin of just 12 votes. The implications were staggering. Earth, barely a century into galactic politics, had just committed to solving one of the galaxy's oldest problems. They had formed an alliance with the most feared species in known space. They had changed the political landscape in ways no one could fully predict. Daiho felt exhausted and exhilarated at the same time. He had done it. Against all odds, against all logic, he had created a path forward. That evening, there was a small gathering in the human delegation quarters. It was not a celebration, exactly, but a recognition that something important had happened. Yuna had arranged food and drinks from Earth. The team sat together, processing what they had accomplished. They are calling you the bridge builder on the news networks, Yuna said, showing Deho her datapad. Some species love it. Some hate it. But everyone is talking about it. Let them talk, Taman said, pouring himself a drink. We did the right thing. That is what matters. Did we, though? Asked Jehoon, one of the junior diplomats. What if we fail? What if we cannot find a cure? We just promised the impossible. We promised to try, Deho corrected. There is a difference. Trying is all anyone can ask. There was a chime at the door. Taman answered it cautiously, then stepped aside. Queen Nara entered alone without guards for the first time. The human team tensed instinctively, but Deho gestured for them to relax. Your Majesty, he said, would you like to join us? She looked around at the small gathering, at the human food and drink, at these beings who had just changed her people's fate. I do not want to intrude. You are not intruding, Yuna said, surprising everyone, including herself. Please sit. Queen Nara sat carefully in an empty chair. Someone handed her a glass of earth wine. She looked at it curiously, then took a small sip. Her expression was unreadable. This is strange, she said finally. Sitting with people who do not fear me. Sharing food and drink like normal beings. This is how it should be, Deho said. This is how peace actually works. Not through treaties and formal agreements, but through moments like this. Through connection. I hope you are right, Queen Nara said softly. I hope we can find a cure. Not just for my people's sake, but to prove that your faith in us was not misplaced. Even if we do not find a cure immediately, Deho said, we will have proven something important. That enemies can become allies. That understanding is possible. That the galaxy can change. They talked late into the night cycle, human and vampire, sharing stories and hopes. It was a small moment, insignificant in the grand scheme of galactic politics. But small moments could change everything. Outside, the stars continued their eternal dance. And somewhere in the darkness, the future was being written. A future where perhaps, just perhaps, monsters could become people again. Where fear could transform into understanding. Where humanity's greatest strength, their endless capacity for hope and compassion, could light the way forward. It would not be easy. It would take years, maybe decades. There would be setbacks and failures. But for the first time in 5,000 years, there was a real chance, a real hope. And sometimes hope was all you needed to change the galaxy. 8 months had passed since the summit at Apex Prime. 8 months of careful diplomacy, scientific collaboration, and slow, painful progress. The galaxy watched with a mixture of hope and skepticism as humans and Velrothi worked side by side in research facilities across 3 systems. Daiho had returned to Earth only twice in that time, each visit brief and filled with reports to government committees and scientific councils. Most of his time was spent either at the Joint Research Station or traveling between human and Velrothi worlds, facilitating communication between scientists who spoke different languages and thought in different ways. The research was promising, but frustratingly slow. The Crimson Plague had rewritten Velrothi genetics at a fundamental level. It was not a simple virus that could be killed with medicine. It was woven into every cell, every strand of DNA. But human xenobiologists working with Velrothi experts had identified potential pathways. Gene therapy, cellular regeneration, controlled mutation. The words meant hope. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday. Daiho was in his office on the research station when Dr. Minji burst through the door. She was one of Earth's top geneticists, a woman in her 30s with wild black hair and eyes that burned with scientific passion. "We did it," she gasped, out of breath from running. "We actually did it." Daiho stood so fast his chair fell backward. "The cure?" "Not a cure, not yet. But a treatment. We can suppress the feeding hunger for up to 3 months with a single injection. The test subjects show no adverse effects. No pain, no loss of strength, just freedom from the need to feed." The implications hit Daiho like a physical force. 3 months without feeding. 3 months where Velrothi could travel, interact, live without being driven by hunger. It was not a cure, but it was a bridge to normal life while they continued searching for the permanent solution. "Have you told Queen Nara?" "Not yet. You should be the one to tell her." Daiho contacted the Velrothi Palace immediately. Queen Nara's response was swift. She would come to the research station personally to see the results. She would arrive in 2 days. Those 2 days felt like 2 years. Daiho reviewed the data constantly, wanting to be absolutely certain before raising hopes that had been crushed so many times before. Dr. Minji and her team ran additional tests, verifying and re-verifying their results. Everything checked out. The treatment worked. Queen Nara arrived with minimal escort, just 2 guards and a small diplomatic team. She had changed in the past 8 months. Not physically, she still looked exactly as she had at the summit, but there was something different in her eyes. Something lighter. Hope, perhaps, or at least the possibility of hope. Daiho met her at the landing bay. She wore practical clothing, not royal regalia. When she saw him, she smiled. A real smile, the kind she shared more frequently now. "Ambassador," she said warmly. "Or should I say friend?" "Friend is better," Daiho agreed. Over the months of working together, they had moved far past formal titles in private. "I have important news. So I gathered from the urgency of your message." He led her to the main research laboratory. Dr. Minji and her team were waiting, along with 3 Velrothi scientists who had become integral to the project. The room was filled with equipment, displays showing genetic sequences, and 3 sealed chambers containing volunteer test subjects. "Your Majesty," Dr. Minji began, then corrected herself at Nara's gesture. "Nara, we have made a breakthrough. We cannot cure the Crimson Plague yet, but we can treat it. We can suppress the feeding hunger for approximately 3 months per treatment." Nara stood very still. "Suppress it entirely?" "The test subjects report no hunger, no compulsion to feed. They retain all their strength and abilities, but the need is simply gone." One of the Velrothi scientists, a man named Kiwan who had worked on the project from the beginning, stepped forward. His crimson eyes were wet with tears. "I volunteered for the first test, Your Majesty. It has been 2 months since the injection. I have not fed and I feel no hunger. For the first time in my life, I am free of it." Nara looked at him, then at the data displays, then at Daiho. Her face was a mask, but her hands trembled slightly. "Are you certain?" "This is not a false hope. We are certain," Daiho said quietly. "It is not the cure we ultimately want, but it is a beginning. Your people can live months at a time without needing to feed, and we are already working on extending that duration." For a long moment, Queen Nara said nothing. Then slowly she sank to her knees. The gesture shocked everyone. A queen, an ancient and powerful being kneeling before them. "For 5,000 years, she whispered, we have searched. For 5,000 years we have hoped and failed and hoped again. And now you bring us this gift." She looked up at Deho, tears streaming freely down her pale cheeks. "How can I ever thank you?" Deho knelt beside her, ignoring the gasps from both human and Velrathi observers. "You do not need to thank me. This is what friends do. They help each other." "Friends," she repeated and laughed through her tears. "I have lived for centuries, and I learn about friendship from a human who has lived barely 4 decades. Then we teach each other," Deho said, helping her to her feet. "That is what makes this work." The news spread across the galaxy like lightning. The human Velrathi research collaboration had produced results. Not a cure yet, but treatment. Proof of concept. Proof that the impossible was actually possible. Reactions were mixed. Some species celebrated, seeing this as a step toward a more peaceful galaxy. Others remained skeptical, calling it a temporary solution to a permanent problem. A few radical groups protested, claiming it was wrong to help vampires in any way. But slowly, steadily, public opinion shifted. It was hard to maintain fear of beings who were actively working to eliminate the source of that fear. It was hard to call Velrathi monsters when they were taking treatments to avoid feeding on others. 6 months after the treatment breakthrough, Queen Nara sent Deho a personal invitation. Not to another diplomatic summit or research facility, but to the Velrathi homeworld. To Velrathi's prime, the planet no outsider had visited in 3,000 years. Deho accepted immediately, though Taman nearly had a heart attack at the security implications. Yuna insisted on coming along, claiming someone needed to document this historic visit. In the end, a small human delegation prepared for the journey. The Velrathi homeworld was beautiful and terrible. Dark cities of crystalline towers that caught starlight and bent it into rainbow patterns. Forests where the trees had silver bark and crimson leaves. Oceans that glowed faintly with bioluminescent life. It was a world transformed by the plague, just like its people. Queen Nara met them at the landing platform herself. She wore formal robes now, silver and black flowing like liquid shadow. Behind her stood not just guards, but hundreds of Velrathi citizens. They had come to see the humans who had given them hope. As Deho descended the ramp from the transport ship, he felt the weight of history pressing down. This moment would be remembered, recorded, studied by future generations. The first human to walk on Velrathi's prime as a friend, not an enemy. Queen Nara stepped forward. She extended her hand in the human gesture of greeting she had learned, palm up, open and vulnerable. Deho took it without hesitation. Her hand was cool and strong. His was warm and soft by comparison. 2 different species, 2 different biologies connected by simple touch. Cameras captured the moment from a dozen angles. The image would be transmitted across the galaxy within the hour. "Ambassador Deho," Nara said formally, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. Then she smiled and her voice softened. "My friend, welcome to my home. Thank you for inviting me." "Your Majesty," Deho replied, then added more quietly, "Thank you for trusting me. You earned that trust 1,000 times over." She led him and the human delegation into the palace. It was a place of impossible beauty, halls carved from crystal that sang softly when the wind passed through. Velrathi art covered the walls, paintings and sculptures that captured moments of beauty and tragedy from their long history. They walked through corridors where ancient queens and kings had walked, through gardens where silver trees grew in impossible spirals, through rooms where Velrathi culture had been preserved even through the darkest times. Finally, they reached a balcony overlooking the capital city. Millions of Velrathi lived in the towers below, going about their lives. From this height, they looked small and fragile, not like fearsome predators. "They are taking the treatments now," Nara said, looking out at her people. "Thousands have volunteered. They are learning what it means to live without hunger. Some cry they are so overwhelmed by the freedom." She turned to him. "You gave us that. You and your people. We only showed you what was possible. You did the rest." Ever the diplomat, deflecting credit, she smiled. "But I know the truth. Without you, none of this would exist. You saw us when the galaxy only saw monsters. You extended your hand when everyone else kept their distance. You changed everything." They stood together looking out at the transformed world. Behind them, Yuna was quietly documenting everything, her camera capturing this historic moment. Taman stood watch, though even he had relaxed slightly. This was not a place of danger. It was a place of hope. "What happens now?" Deho asked. "Where do we go from here?"